right. So thank you everyone for tuning in to listen to this episode of From the Pulpit to the Podcast for my Amplify Israel Fellowship project. Today I'm joined by my mentor in rabbinical school, my teacher, certainly both from school and after, and also who was the former director of the rabbinical school at HUC in Cincinnati. This is Rabbi Jan Katzew. Um, our episode today reflects on a sermon I delivered on the 4th of July of this past year, when Shabbat and American Independence Day happened to overlap. I talked a bit about what it means to hold these two deep kinds of loves, one for our people as Jews, and also one for our country as Americans. And the question at the heart of this teaching that I gave is one that has shaped generations of American Jews, and one that I've thought plenty about myself, and that is, what does it mean to be both fully Jewish and fully American? And I can think of no one better to unpack this question with me than my, again, teacher and Rabbi Jan Katzew, whose work has guided countless rabbis in thinking about peoplehood, identity, and covenant. And the one last thing I'll add to that is, Jan, I remember when we were at off-campus retreat that where you said something about we have to make a decision about what world kind of we want to, how much of what world we want to be in, and that is I reflected on that conversation as I wrote this sermon, and so you immediately came to mind as someone for whom to reflect on it. So thank you. Uh, so, uh, um, Rabbi Katsu, would you like me to refer to you as Rabbi Katsu or
Jan.
Jan? Okay, you
Jan
got
would be fine with
it.
me.
Okay,
It's a very gracious introduction, and I hope that this podcast will contribute to your thinking and to this project.
thank you so much, Jan. Feel free to call me Jonathan. um, so, um, I began this sermon really by talking about the intersection of what are two celebrations, right? Shabbat, Jewish peoplehood through Shabbat, and nationhood as Americans by virtue of our Independence Day that we mark on the 4th. So there's kind of a tension as well as a harmony between these two celebrations, and that is to say, for Shabbat and the 4th of July, both are about freedom. Shabbat in a spiritual kind of sense, and the 4th of July in a political freedom sense, and not only about freedom but also belonging. And they share these two attributes, but in their own and very different kinds of ways. One question I thought would be great for us to start with is, do you think there's something uniquely Jewish about the way that we understand freedom?
Well, I think that with respect to Jewish thought on freedom, the first place and source that I consider is probably Isaiah Berlin. Two Types of Liberty is one of the great essays written in the 20th century. And he, in that essay, distinguishes between freedom from and freedom to.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, in a sense, that goes back to the book of Exodus, uh, when we are enjoined with, I believe, the following words. I'll say them first in Hebrew and then in English. Shalach et ami v'ya'avduni. Let my people go, that they may serve me. So let my people go is freedom from. Freedom from, in this case, slavery, from serving any human master. However, freedom from, although it's necessary to be free, is not, Jewishly speaking, sufficient. The freedom to via avduni, to serve God. So it is free from human slavery, and servitude, but free to serve a divine being.
So freedom from is more of a um, or rather freedom to, as you had said, freedom to worship and practice in our tradition and the way that we see fit, um, is uh, is both related and also different from the idea of being liberated from something.
Yes, I would say the way that I recall Isaiah Berlin wrote about these freedoms is that freedom from is negative liberty and freedom to is positive liberty.
Mm.
And so, from my perspective, I think that in terms of Shabbat and July 4th, freedom from celebrates the the sense that we can determine our own destiny. That as Americans, we were free from taxation without representation.
Right.
But free to is free to, in this instance, worship as we would choose, as we would hope. So there is a relatedness, I think, between these freedoms. They're not uh, they're not identical, of course, but they are interdependent in a sense. But I think that it's one thing to observe July 4th and recognize that we are free as Americans to determine our own destiny, and altogether another move to decide I am intentionally going to lead a Jewish life and have that be have Shabbat be part of the rhythm of my life.
Yes, yes, that is beautifully articulated. That um, if I understand you correctly, that freedom from leads to freedom to. That and that's true in both instances, both in our American historical context of freedom from tyranny allowed us for freedom to be an independent nation and write our own constitution and so on and so forth. And for Shabbat, freedom from the rest of the week, and the melacha, the work that we do during the week leads us to be able to have freedom to worship and to reconnect with ourselves and our community and our tradition in a way that is different from the other 6 days.
Yes, and as I think Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, if during the week we are occupied with the world of creation, on Shabbat we're occupied with the creation of the world.
Mm. Yes, beautifully said. Thank you. I um I think what you had mentioned earlier about the rhythm of Shabbat, it speaks directly to the other question I had in mind for this segment, and that is, we know Shabbat obviously has its rhythm. The Fourth of July has its rhythm. They're different rhythms. One is each week. One is once a year. They have their own practices. Shabbat, we celebrate in community. We refrain from acts of work, and on the Fourth of July, we invite our friends and neighbors over for barbecues, and we go to the local park for to watch the fireworks, right? But Shabbat, in its rhythm and with its practices, seems to almost be a counterpoint to this ideal of American independence and rugged individualism that is part of the American ethos. And so I was wondering kind of how you kind of square those two.
Uh, well, I'm not sure that I square them. I think that there's something delightfully countercultural about Judaism and its practice wherever it's practiced, including in the United States. Uh, in an essay, I think it's by Soloveitchik, the Rav, In 1962, 63, he wrote something called Confrontation in the journal Tradition. And this was just prior to Nostra Aetate, to In Our Time, which was an attempt by the Roman Catholic Church to reach out to other religious communities and constituencies, but in particular, in this instance, to the Jewish people. And Soloveitchik was asked if he would be willing to participate in that process. He decided, in contrast to Abraham Joshua Heschel, that he would not do so, and that in part this article was an explanation of his rationale. And uh, to reduce a very profound and lengthy article to its essence, with hopefully without doing violence to it, he argued that a Jew, in many respects, is is an extended commentary on the way Abraham introduced himself to the Hittites when he buried his wife Sarah. He said, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, I am a stranger and I'm a resident among you. Now, in any language, including obviously in English, it's contradiction in terms to be both a stranger and a resident. You're either one or the other. But the argument that Soloveitchik was making is actually no, Jews need to be both. We need to figure out when there are times that we need to be strangers and when there are times we need to be residents. When do we swim with the cultural mainstream and when do we swim against the cultural mainstream? And in many respects, Shabbat is against the cultural mainstream. It's saying, no, we're going to rest. We are not going to work 24/7. And we are going to occupy ourselves not with the material world. We're going to focus on the spiritual world. And I think that there is something brave and even brazen about pushing against the very powerful Americanism that you described as rugged individualism and saying, well, we're going to be just as rugged, but we're going to be just as rugged in our communitarianism.
That's beautiful. And you know what also comes to mind when you say that is the importance and how critical Jewish education is, because one can't make a distinction between the mainstream and that which is part of tradition, and its moral implications. Without understanding those kind of nuances and or appreciating them rather. And so I know education is a passion of yours, and I'm sure that you would agree with me that that moral teaching begins not just when you get to studying Gemara or something, but at the earliest of stages.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I want to jump to our next part, and this is a bit historical, but also for us to learn from that history of our people within the American Jewish context, and that is the legacy of figures like Chaim Solomon and Francis Salvador, along with communities like Congregation Yesharet Israel in New York City, and how they remind us of how Jews were had never been outsiders, even from the very onset of the establishment of this country, and but rather were critical contributors to it. Um, so first, as a general question, I want to probe your mind and ask what you find most striking about the Jewish role in America's founding.
Well, you mentioned some extraordinary figures, and one of the questions that I had even listening to you is, to what extent were they extraordinary within both an American and a Jewish context?
Mm.
Sometimes, uh, we hold up giants as exceptions, and they mask or they can mask what the overwhelming preponderance of Jews were doing at any particular moment. So my question back to you would be, to what extent were the folks that you mentioned, Solomon and Salvador, to what extent were they representative of the Jewish community, and to what extent were they, to use a term or to misappropriate a term that was used in a different context historically, to what extent were they exception Jews?
That's a great and brilliant question. As soon as you had said it, I started to smile because it is the other point that is the point of chavruta, right? That you don't think about even, right? This this idea of them as for instance, Chaim Solomon, well known for financing the American Revolution. Francis Salvador was one of the first publicly elected officials who were Jewish, and also the first Jew to die as in battle during the revolution. Um, and um, it reminds me actually of my part of my rabbinic thesis where I wrote about Montefiore and um, off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I'm ashamed to say I can't remember his name, but he was a Frenchman who
Well,
was.
when you get to your age, I mean, you may, I,
That's right. Yeah, right.
not
Well,
a problem.
the ring adds a few years. um, he was he was um inspiring because Montefiore, who was much more observant and serious about Jewish practice in a traditional sense, the this influential Frenchman was in fact quite confidently secular, although very deeply committed to the Jewish people as a people. And the two of them together made immense strides toward the formation of a Jewish state, and not just that, but contributing to the Jewish life that existed in the land of Israel in their time, as well as extending their influence over countries that called the shots, like appealing to the monarchy in Britain and other power players of the day. So this reminds me of him, who um, you know was proud of who he was, and also was very proud to shake off traditional practices and kind of stick his thumb up at them and say, "And I'm still Jewish, and what I do is purely Jewish, and that's what this mission is, and I'm charismatic about it, and I get people on my side for it." So Montefiore, like you keep Shabbat as the rabbis teach, and I will get the money. I will make sure I get the political influence beyond the influence that you can also provide in a tangible sense. But this this idea that they are not necessarily representative is important, and I also think it is representative as a whole, because when you think about the Jewish community, bigadol in general at
Yeah,
large. There are those who are deeply connected, and there are those also who are also deeply connected or connected to some extent, but don't see their connection in a religious or observant kind of fashion. And that is no and that has no bearing on their connection to our tradition and to their heritage. And so um, if we were to highlight, for instance, Haim Solomon and Francis Salvador as
yes,
figures who may not be representative of the observant community of their time, there certainly I see is a through line from from them to today, and that is even major Jewish philanthropists of today care so much about Jewish institutions, and it doesn't mean you're going to see them every Friday night,
right.
and
Yes,
I think that that's a testament to the power of Jewish continuity, tradition, and peoplehood,
yes,
that extends beyond Jewish peoplehood, but also making room for the place in which they reside, also, and knowing
Yes.
how that can bring them to their goals.
Well, look, I agree that there are sort of multiple conflicting narratives. There isn't any single narrative line of American Jews or American Jewish history. And so, yes, there were clearly people, including those you've mentioned already, who had larger than single person influence uh, on the trajectory of the United States in its infancy. Initially, for example, there were great concerns about whether, quote, Orthodox Jewish life could even be sustained here, thinking that everybody here was, the term was an Amma Aretz, just a person who was functionally illiterate Jewishly, even if they were literate in many other languages and cultural elements. So over time, and now it's the case that the fastest growing subpopulation of the Jewish people in the United States is Orthodox.
Right.
So we've seen flux and changes that have been quite profound over the course of time. Uh, Risen to the highest positions in, say, the judiciary. And I'm thinking of, for example, the first person to do so, Louis Brandeis, who was, again, functionally illiterate, even in his own words, Jewishly speaking, up until he was almost 50 years old, and then feeling embarrassed that he was extremely well educated, but didn't know very much at all about his own identity, Jewishly speaking, became an ardent Zionist, pushed against the leadership in the reform movement directly, and said that basically Americanism and Zionism are in harmony with one another, and that dual loyalty is a canard. It's a false dichotomy and a binary that we should push against rather than accept as some sort of challenge for us to address. That one can be most fully an American when one is a Zionist. And that's again freedom from and freedom to in many respects. It's freedom to express one's Zionist because in this country we are free from having to serve any human master, and that includes the President of the United States or anyone else. So Brandeis profoundly influenced Woodrow Wilson to support the Balfour Declaration in 1917 because he already had a relationship with Wilson. He told him he was going to be supportive of him becoming president of the United States. And when Wilson had a Secretary of State who was opposed to the Balfour Declaration, he the president leaned against the Secretary of State and uh, with Brandeis. So, I mean, there are all kinds of instances in which great people have risen to transcend the internecine squabbling between Americanism and Zionism.
As you said that, the first thing that came to my mind when speaking about um, that Brandeis got a later kind of start toward his education was what a modern Rabbi Akiva, right?
Amen.
That from a later stage in life, one can still start from scratch, you might say, and bring that which you learn into your life in a way that enriches it and can change it. Um, so you mentioned dual loyalty, and this is something I also want to touch upon because the title I gave to this sermon is technically, let's see, what was it? A Nation Within, Jewish Peoplehood, and the American Promise. So we start with, that first phrase, a nation within. It's hard to hear that without unfortunately thinking of the our detractors by criticizing American Jews as having dual loyalty. That is to say that one, how can one possibly be loyal to the country in which one lives and resides and has their life while also praying for a return to another nation, another place? Um, and here we are as Jews, as a nation of a people within a nation that is a nation state and also part of the American nation of people. Um, and I, uh, I tried to reframe this as dual loyalty, not through a lens of suspicion, but rather through a lens of purpose. And so, while that phrase, a nation within a nation, has been weaponized, it also captures something very real about Jewish peoplehood that transcends borders. And that is also not in conflict with one's loyalty for one's own host or a country or the country in which one resides. And so this kind of brings us to the idea of Jewish covenant and however one understands that covenant between one another, a covenant between a Jew and God, and observance and practices of that which make us a people. Um, all of that in the context of being American. I want to ask you, what do you think it means to belong to a people defined by that covenant, rather than strictly by geography, right? Lines on a map.
Well, my initial response, and there I have a few different responses. My initial response, since you used the word belong, I'm not sure that the best preposition to follow that word is to. I think it really should be with, because the Jewish people doesn't own me. I know that it's a very common phrase, or at least a phrase that I've heard commonly when speaking about one's spouse. Well, she belongs to me, or I belong to her, or or something of that nature. I've never thought that was funny. I've never thought that was appropriate, because I don't think people belong to each other.
Right.
I think people belong with each other. And as a matter of fact, the most recent essay I wrote is a chapter in a book on belonging. Uh, the book is supposed to come out actually in the next month.
Mm.
And the book is entitled Striving to be Human. And I think it's important, and I'll reflect for a moment on something that may seem like a digression, but it isn't for me. When I'm adopted and when I was growing up, I remember very vividly being a young child, and my sister is adopted as well, and people would look at my parents and then they would look at us very kind of quizzically, like, you don't look like him and you don't look like her. Do you belong to each other? Do you belong with each other? Is this a family in front of me? And of course, that situation is magnified many times over when a child who is adopted is of a different race, for example. And we have all kinds of associations with what it means to, quote, belong. Ironically, our two children are adopted. And in contrast to my experience as a child, my experience as an adult and as a parent has been, even though our children are adopted, people would have said to us and did say to us when we were, oh, you look just like Jan, or you look just like Lainey. So we would kind of look at each other and smile, knowing that the notion of belonging is really quite textured, quite layered, quite nuanced. And there are people, even with respect to the Jewish community, who only know Ashkenazim, or only think that somebody who looks a certain way can be Jewish. And that's, of course, nonsensical. But it's also dangerous from my perspective, that a Jew looks a certain way or behaves a certain way. And to be authentic, you have to if you're male, you have to have a beard and all sorts of other accoutrements, so to speak. So um, I tend to bridle at the notion of belonging to anything and feeling more comfortable with belonging with others. Let me stop there and see uh, how you would wish to proceed.
That is a beautiful distinction. I never even really considered the preposition as being as so significant as you just very articulately described. And the one thought I have about that is when one says belong to a people or a nation. As you said, like it implies like ownership, which is when it comes to like relationships is it shocks the conscience. One doesn't belong to another. Um, and Yet, in contrast to belonging with, there's something about that seems weaker, and perhaps it's because it acknowledges that there is a mutual kind of agreement and fits when one says with that both accept that belonging, but to belong to just feels a bit more definitive and affirmative. Do you have any kind of thoughts about that? I mean, I wouldn't say I belong to, many things, but perhaps I might say I do belong to the Jewish people, as a servant to the Jewish people, as a rabbi, but not in a sense that I don't have my own agency.
I think it is quite possible, of course, that I am um, exploring an element of hyperbole by pushing against the the notion of belonging to. And as I said, there's some, I guess, emotional valence to this from my own upbringing. That's why I shared the personal
Yes.
anecdote, because I was just very uncomfortable with that notion, or even the offhand remark about belonging to my wife or something, or spouse or something like that. But you asked a question about belonging to a people. And I still am more personally comfortable with belonging with the Jewish people. I, growing up, would say that I belonged with Temple Israel in Brockton, Massachusetts. I didn't belong to that building. I didn't belong to that community. I belonged with multiple communities, in part because for me, in terms of a human identity, even though this is not entirely grammatically correct, I tend to subscribe to the theory that you are who you're with.
Right.
To a
No,
great degree, we are defined personally by who's on our team. If life is a team sport, and over the course of your life, there are people who join that team and people you may dismiss from that team or who leave that team, some by death, some by divorce, some by just falling away over time. But I tend to think that, in contrast somewhat to the rugged individualism that you described, that in Jewish life it is much more of uh, a team process throughout that life. And I would say I belong with the Jewish people. And you mentioned about within, that would be within the United States. But to be candid, if I made Aliyah, as one of our children did, there are Jews there with whom I would not belong,
right,
without question.
right.
Um,
No,
and
that's a brilliant highlight that especially that the Jewish community is far from monolithic, right? And that's an important point to make. And I would also say that and tell me if you agree with me, but I think the sages, the Talmudists would agree with that description and characterization, especially in terms of one who is a Ger Toshav, or not even beyond that, like Ruth. She belongs with our people. And that was a recognition of on both sides.
Yes, yes. I like the idea, Ruth, that's a beautiful example. And the idea that, to this day, someone who embraces Judaism or adopts Judaism will very often recite, Amech ami ve'Elohai Elohai. Your people will be my people, your God will be my God. And that is the essence of I belong with you. And
Yes.
and to say to another person, you belong, is a very empowering statement and construct that I am drawn to. I would even say I love that, having had that experience both with people who have embraced and adopted Judaism, as well as people who just have moved to a new community. To have them feel as though they belong with you is is a statement. Look, we just celebrated this past week, reading about Hachnasat Orchim, reading about how Abraham and Sarah welcomed people and extended themselves significantly. And one of the questions that I just asked a whole group of adults, and actually and children as well, is when you think of people who are hospitable in your life, share a story about what made them so. That is a profound value. Is it only a Jewish value? I hope not, and I wouldn't say that it would be, but it is definitely a sanctified, consecrated Jewish expression to have people feel at home, that they really belong with whom they're sharing, whether it's a meal or a night or whatever it may be.
I love that that interpretation, that to belonging extends well beyond one's identification with a group. As courageous and brave as one must be to join a group from from the outside, but even for, as you said, a meal. That to feel comfortable, and I think part of that comfort also is includes a measure of emotional intelligence. That is to say, um, you like you're welcome in my home, and we're and this is how we're having Shabbat dinner. And don't if we start benching, and you don't you're not familiar with some of the prayers that we may say, like I hope that you'll just sit back and enjoy, and listen, and let it and take it in, and do what's comfortable for you, is also part of that other side of not belonging, but helping others to feel like they belong.
Yes.
So I let's see here. There are two quick things. They're not quick at all, but what I want to go through quickly
All right.
are first this verse from Jeremiah that I think speaks directly to this point of being a nation as part of another nation, and also how that manifests itself in American Jewish life today. So the verse of which I refer now is Jeremiah 29:7, and he says, "Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you." Beyond that, that in its welfare, you will find your welfare. So I speak about in this teaching I gave, this sermon, rather than understanding it as dual loyalty, but perhaps covenantal loyalty. And that this message of Jeremiah, that to seek the welfare of the city, captures that ethos of being a Jew in America better than any kind of political slogan possibly could. So with Jeremiah's words in mind, that we are to not only seek the welfare of the place in which we are, but that we will rise as as we participate and contribute to its welfare. And it's our obligation, in a sense, to embrace the place in which that we do reside for that reason. So, um, First, I just want to ask you, what comes to mind when you hear that phrase covenantal loyalty with respect to both a Jewish covenant and perhaps covenant with respect to one's loyalty to one's country as a Jew or not even as a Jew?
Um, well, I would say initially that it's one of those phrases I would need to ruminate on because I think of Jeremiah as being uh, someone who needed to thread a spiritual needle, so to speak, if there is such a thing, that he knew that the people were in exile, and I use that word advisedly. There wasn't really a construct like diaspora that exists now, that these were people who had been punished, and their punishment was to be banished from the land of Israel. And then the question became, in their period of punishment, how were they going to survive? And so even if that period of punishment was to be evanescent, uh, he was counseling them to make the best of it and to uh, find ways to contribute to that culture and to do the best that one could, recognizing it was not an ideal circumstance.
Right.
So that's part that's intention, perhaps, with the notion that uh, we in the United States should
Embrace.
not be harboring a sense that this is a temporary existence, and that ultimately and ideally we would be in the land of Israel, although clearly there are people, without question, indeed, many of the pioneers and founders of the state of Israel held exactly that position. Thinking of, Jabotinsky, who almost exactly 90 years ago basically said, here's the choice. Either we're going to end the diaspora or the diaspora is going to end us. You decide.
Right.
So there were definitely those who viewed it as a binary, as an either or. But as a different strategy of living in the diaspora, one can, as you, I think, are seeking to do, suggest that Jeremiah offers an alternative to thinking that we are just here and the sands in the hourglass are running down and then we have to leave. Uh,
Precisely.
but that while as long as we're here, and to make this place a place where we belong and a place in a people with whom we belong. And America has certainly been among the most hospitable of hosts since, what is it, 1648 or thereabouts. And we're coming up, I guess, on what will be 400 years, which has its own ominous resonances in Jewish history, with 400 years being a period of time in which empires exist and then cease to exist. But uh, I guess Jeremiah presents a ray of light and a ray of hope that one can find, in this case, within the United States, joy and fulfillment and spiritual satisfaction, and as much as possible, home.
I think that is a beautiful way for us to wrap up our conversation today. I was one another last point that I was going to touch on, but I think we just did, and that you did so beautifully is this this idea that our although it we can take Jeremiah's words contextually and translate that or transpose them rather to our kind of modern milieu as American Jews. That's not to say that we don't that the words don't still remain the same while we interpret them in a different way, and that both American and Jewish identities are complementary. So when I spoke in this sermon about lighting Shabbat candles, as we did at the start, I encouraged people, that it shouldn't stop them from lighting sparklers, at the same, on the same day. Um, and that's I think that this gift of American freedom has allowed the growth of Jewish life well beyond that which may have been possible without uh, the philosophy and the kind of encouragement that is present within American civic life, that is to pursue that which is that which you belong with, and those principles, while thriving in it, and recognizing that it's a privilege to be a part of this nation that gives us that flexibility that we can honor just as much as we honor our own tradition.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you so much, Jan, Rabbi Katzew. And like I said, I can't think of anyone else who I'd have preferred to have this conversation with. Uh,
Well, I appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate you, Rabbi Falco, Jonathan, and Batzlacha. All the best with this project and much beyond that.
Thank you so much, Jan.